The 63 days between August 1st and October 3rd, 1944 went down in history as an extremely heroic but futile and tragic struggle of the Polish nation for the liberation of the capital Warsaw. At stake was not only the expulsion of the Nazi occupiers, but also the entire subsequent fate of Poland. However, the Nazis literally drowned this Warsaw Uprising in blood. As a result, it meant not only the loss of almost 250,000 lives, but also that Poland would become an integral part of the communist bloc for 4 long decades. Exactly as Soviet leader Stalin had wished, whose Red Army more or less stood idly by during the unequal struggle and the mass murder of tens of thousands of civilians. To fully understand the context of those 2 months at the turn of the summer and autumn of 1944, we must go back 5 years. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler's army invaded Poland, starting World War II. Unlike Czechoslovakia, the Poles did not capitulate and decided to defend the country with the help of their Western allies, Britain and France. Although they declared war on Germany, they had neither the strength nor the desire to provide real help. Poland thus led a lonely and brave fight against German superiority. It received a definitive blow to the ligaments 17 days later, when the Soviet army attacked it and annexed the entire east of the country. In some cities, joint Soviet-German parades were even held. October 6th was over, and Poland ceased to exist. Its western part was annexed directly to the Reich, the east to the Soviet Union, and in the central part, the so-called general government was established, which included Warsaw. After this prologue, we can move back to 1944. 5 years of occupation devastated the Polish nation, killing a large part of its elite, but it never broke the resistance. An illegal underground state existed on Polish territory with its own structures and, above all, an armed component. The so-called Land Army, in addition to an admirably tenacious fight against the occupiers, was always able to fill the gaps left by those who had fallen with new members. It acted as an extended arm of the government in exile in London. This is well illustrated by the famous statement of the Nazi Governor General Hans Frank. When I was in Prague, I saw posters hanging there announcing the execution of 7 Czechs. If I hung posters every time we had 7 Poles executed, the entire Polish forest would not be enough. Now, in the summer of 1944, in connection with how quickly the Soviet army is advancing from the east, the entire command of the Polish resistance and the majority of the nation, which cannot forget the year 1939 for the Soviets, are aware of the great danger. The Soviets are handing over power in the liberated territories to newly created bodies of the communist type, and the ubiquitous NKVD Secret Service is liquidating without any emotion those who disagree with this. Including active fighters against the Nazis, Stalin simply has his own clear plans for the future with Poland. And so the Polish non-communist resistance is actually left with only one option: to try to liberate as much of the country as possible before the arrival of the Soviets, and to create its own message for Poland. Such a message will not be so easily stopped, and which will serve as a kind of dam against the communist takeover of the country. That Warsaw will be key in this regard is clear to absolutely everyone. In the second half of July, the Red Army advanced to Warsaw, fighting in its eastern suburbs. Now the game was about time, and the pressure to declare an uprising against the Nazis was growing. Finally, the commander-in-chief of the Land Army, Tadeusz Komorowski, finally scheduled it for August 1st, and this despite great doubts that his troops were really ready. The plan was basically simple: use the moment of surprise, capture key strongholds in the city, and create a territory around them that could be defended against the infinitely better armed Nazis until the Red Army came across the river to help. It was generally calculated that the uprising could last 3 to 5 days. 10 was considered the absolute maximum. However, none of the original goals were achieved. An hour before the uprising began, the German command received a warning from a Luftwaffe officer who was advised by his Polish mistress to leave the city, and this hour was enough for the German troops to organize their defense. The rebels thus gained only small, disconnected parts of the city, which were very difficult to defend. In the following days, the Nazis began to crush the uprising. Their material superiority was enormous. Moreover, the orders of Hitler and Himmler ordered the most brutal possible procedure: to execute prisoners and civilians and to raze the city to the ground. For example, between August 5th and 7th, the Nazis murdered the entire city district of Wola, including women and children. It is estimated that around 40,000 people died here, which makes this event one of the largest single massacres of the civilian population during the entire war. But what was the biggest shock for the rebels were the orders that the Red Army received from the other side of the river. Although the command of the Polish resistance assumed that despite the different ideas about the future organization of the country, the Soviets would prioritize the fight against a common enemy, the Red Army completely stopped its advance and limited itself to only a small amount of material aid. Stalin justified this by saying that his soldiers did not have enough strength to cross the Vistula. And so the Soviet troops basically watched as the Nazis liquidated the uprising and at the same time killed thousands of civilians. The resistance of the insurgents was, in a word, heroic. They resisted alone and in vain for 2 whole months. Everyone fought, even women and children who often passed through the burning canal under the city and acted as messengers. The knowledge that whoever falls into the hands of the Nazis will be killed anyway gave the insurgents a desperate motivation to fight until their last breath. Only after 63 long days, in exchange for a promise that the prisoners would be treated according to wartime conventions, did representatives of the provincial army sign an inevitable surrender. Some of the fighters, including Commander Komorowski, surrendered, while others merged with the civilian population. The Germans subsequently expelled 700,000 inhabitants and, strictly according to orders, called in special engineering units to raze the looted city to the ground. 85% of Warsaw was thus left in ruins. Only when it was all over in January 1945 did the Red Army units cross the frozen Vistula and begin to liberate the city. Hand in hand with them were the NKVD units, who purposefully liquidated or sent to the Gulag those participants in the uprising who were still surviving in the ghost town or trying to return. The Polish war tragedy was complete.